Hi YouTube, my name's Jeff, and I'm the visual guy. The other day I was on the way to my garage workshop. Is that you next door's cat? Get away from my sand. Swine cat. Where's that light switch? What's this? Ah, let's open it up. There's a note. Thanks, BigstackD. I think I will. What's this? Nice. I'll have to try that later. So, inspired by my Aussie mate and fellow YouTuber BigstackD, I decided to have a go at making Mehrunes Razor from Skyrim. To start with, I needed a nice image to work from, and I was able to find this fantastic drawing by andrewbig on Deviant Art. For purists out there, it's important to note that I didn't stick to the drawing. I adjusted the proportions to make something a little more suitable for my needs. I'm sure the artist will understand. I'm having no luck with Lost wax casting at the moment, but Lost Foam Casting has always worked well for me. So I got out the old hot wire foam cutter and got ready to do some cutting. It was then just a case of cutting out the shapes and gluing them to the foam. Then the hot wire cutter was used to cut out the shapes. You know your cutter is up to the task when you can cut pieces as thin as this. The various pieces of foam get glued together, and the beauty of extruded foam is that it can be sanded and shaped with ease. It's best not to overdo the shaping though, especially with material that's this thin. It's better to grind it away later when it's metal. I included a few basic mortise and tenon joints to help the pieces glue together. The handle was surprisingly easy to make. I pushed a long thin bolt through a length of foam and spun it in my drill press. Then it was just a case of very gently touching the foam with some sandpaper and shaping things. Extruded foam shapes really well in this fashion, but you'll want to wear a dust mask. A small file helped me carve some details. Then everything got glued together and I had something that looked a little bit like Mehrunes Razor, but the tricky bit was going to be casting it. This is the longest thing I've cast to date, and I needed to knock together a new flask. If you're wondering what the large corner blocks are for, it's simple. I didn't think I had enough sand for the job, damn next door's cat, and I was right. So it turned out to be a good idea. I'm starting with a cope here, the upper flask, and right now it's upside down. I'll empty it in a minute, but for the moment I want to achieve a nice flat surface. Here's the drag, the bottom flask, and as you can see that's the very underside of the flask you're looking at. Because the foam is so weak, compacting sand on top of it will distort the pattern. These pieces of foam were cut to support the underside of the pattern to compensate for this. Once I was confident the pattern was well supported, I began sieving on some sand, and I wanted a nice depth. Once I got a good couple of inches of sieved sand on top, I began to gently press the sand, aiming not to crush the pattern, but to ease the sand into the details and importantly, all around it. Ramming will just break the foam, and your fingers are amazingly clever in these situations. You can feel the shape of the pattern and the compression of the sand. Begin gently and press more firmly as the sand settles into place, but don't rush things. More sand was sieved on top, and more finger pressure was used. Sand was then trolled in to fill the drag. Here I'm beginning to ram the sand, but you can see I'm not going mad. No heavy-handed treatment is necessary. It's just a case of letting the sand firm up. The sand is topped up again, and now I'm using a little more ramming force. Look, there's my sand bucket. I told you I didn't think I'd got enough sand, and I only just had enough. I'm being a little more energetic here to fully fill the drag and level it firmly. I don't want the sand falling out. Now comes the fun part. Flipping the flask over. Finally, everything is the correct way up. The top is removed and the sand is knocked out into my bucket and refreshed. Here you can see the support pieces that held the pattern in place. These need to be removed. I needed to add vents and a feeder, so I brushed and scraped away the sand in places. The pattern is pretty firmly held in place, but it's best not to disturb it if possible. I'm going to be using one of my plaster feeders, and this shaped piece of foam will connect it. The screw holds it in place until the sand can take over the job. The cope was then added and I screwed it in place to prevent it from moving. Now, these are new for me. They're wooden dowels with a fine point carved into them. They're used to create vents. The spike pierces the foam and helps the dowel stay in place. Again, sand is sifted on, trying not to disturb the dowels. Once I reached the height of the screw, I began to press the sand down with my fingertips, paying special attention to the dowels. More sand and more pressing. At this point I was able to ram with more confidence, knowing that I couldn't damage the foam pattern beneath. The screw was removed and here's the plaster feeder. If you're wondering what all the tape is for, this is recycled. The upper section survived a previous pour, so I used it again here. At this point I realised I'd forgotten the paper cover on the feeder, which keeps the sand out, so I clumsily taped one into place. It'll do. The cope was then fully filled and roughly levelled. I began to fear that the feeder wasn't very well secured, so I grabbed an old food can and pushed this on for support, but to be honest I needn't have bothered, it really wasn't necessary. With everything firmed down, I used a fine spoke to poke a number of vent holes. Remember, the spoke shouldn't come into contact with the foam pattern, but it should ideally get pretty close, maybe within half an inch or so. And these spoke vents really work, so they're worth doing. The dowels were then twisted carefully and pulled out slowly. Try not to dislodge any sand. The metal was nice and hot, glowing pink. I poured it in, and it went wrong. You can see the vents pulsating with gas, which is good, but you can't see the vent at the other end, and nothing was coming out. You can just about see it from this angle. Like I said, nothing was coming out. Metal was spilling on the floor, but nothing was coming out of the end vent. It was a fail. I took a gamble and splashed some molten metal into the fine vent hole. It was such a clumsy pour I couldn't see what was happening. Then bizarrely, I decided to top up the feeder. As I expected, the vents had already frozen, but the feeder bubbled with gas. The volume level dropped slightly, so I topped it up some more, refreshing the temperature of the metal and allowing more gas to bubble out. I sulkily stomped out of the room to get away from the smoke, swearing at a wasted opportunity. I'd made a mistake. I'd forgotten one of my own rules. Minimise the amount of extruded foam. It's great stuff and it shapes well, but it's hard work on the metal. I should have incorporated as many air gaps as I could and built using expanded foam where possible, which is much easier on the metal. When I returned about 15 minutes later, I wasn't expecting a success. That's often a mistake with this method, as it's so forgiving. But I was convinced of my failure, so my camera work was half-hearted as I knocked away the sand. On the blade section, where the metal had failed to run, the metal was badly pitted, but it was mostly formed. I'd left material there specifically to grind away, so there was potential. Could I grind something nice from this mess? Well, make up your own mind. Here's the result. It's been grinded and painted and it's certainly not perfect, but it's not too bad either. There's still a tiny bit of pitting evident on the blade, but for my first attempt at this sort of thing, I was quite pleased. It's not an exact replica of Mehrunes Razor. I've been cheeky with my proportions, the length of the handle and especially the pommel, which lacks spikes, but it's a reasonable replica of something from a great game. I'm not sure what these bits are called, but I painted these a darker silver. For me, the two-tone effect was a little bland, and making this slight variation pleased my eye, but I know it won't be to everyone's tastes. Plus, and here's the sly confession, one of these sections held a nasty flaw, so I've covered it over with a slither of cardboard and paint. I'll let you try and work out which one it is. I certainly haven't sharpened the edges, and this was a personal choice. I wanted to make something that we can show to Granny when she came visiting, and not something that Granny could use to go rampaging round the local supermarket with. So it is what it is, a replica. But all in all, this was an enjoyable and fun project, surprisingly easy to do with green sand and lost foam. I think the vents let things down a little, and I should have incorporated more voids or expanded foam, but that's something to think about on another day. So I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and if you did, please like it. If you'd like to see me do something similar in the future, why not drop me a line and tell me what you're thinking. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and above all, take care and thanks for watching.